Welcome to Washington in Focus, your source for the top news stories across the state of Washington. I'm your host, Cole McNeely. Washington in Focus is a production of the Center Square. Go check out all the stories you hear about today and more at thecentersquare.com. Today on Washington in Focus, Washington drivers may be funding transit at the gas pump, and Washington House Democrats pass a bill requiring permits for gun purchases. That and more coming up on this edition of Washington in Focus. We'll be right back after this.
Some people would call him a loser. He ran for state office. He was beaten. He started a business. He failed. He ran for Congress. He lost. He was nominated for vice president. He lost again. But he knew only those who never tried are the real losers. And Abraham Lincoln was no loser. Persistence. Pass it on. From the Foundation for a Better Life at values.com.
Welcome back to Washington in Focus. I'm your host, Cole McNeely. After a vigorous hours-long debate that began the night before, Washington state Democrats in the House of Representatives last Saturday morning voted to pass legislation that would require would-be gun owners to obtain a permit before purchase. This has raised legal and constitutional questions both at the state level and at the federal level. With more on this, we go to the Center Square's Washington reporter, Tim Clouser. He's with Carlene Johnson.
I'm Tim Clouser with our Washington Capitol reporter, Carlene Johnson, here to talk about a pretty contested bill passed by the Washington State House of Representatives recently, House Bill 1163. Carlene, tell me a little bit about this bill and what it does.
Well, yeah, this is of the gun control, gun safety bills that have been pitched by majority Democrats during the session. This one, HB 11623, by far the most contested, hotly debated. So it was brought up by majority Democrats on the House floor late last Friday. It was debated for hours, in fact, until about 2 a.m. the following morning. And then they resumed later in the day on Saturday to get this thing passed off the House floor. Party line vote, 58 to 38. Not a single Republican supported this permit to purchase, Tim. And, they liken it to a gun registry, right? Because what you, a prospective gun buyer, will have to do now is, go to the state patrol and apply. They'll do a background check there. You will pay a fee. We don't know what the fee is going to be as yet to get this permit. You will then have to also take a safety course. So there's lots of sort of hoops, if you will, that you're going to have to pass through and pay for a permit before you can then go to your local gun shop and buy, handgun, whatever kind of firearm you're looking for. So certainly, as Republicans see it, some things getting in the way of, your Washington State Constitution, Article 1, Section 24 right, which should be right, unabridged, or what's the wording for it? You have to help me with that, Tim. But, it shouldn't make it more difficult for someone to go out and purchase a firearm when they decide they want to.
Mm-hmm. Like you said, the testimony on this from both sides stretched into more than one day. I'm assuming there was a number of amendments on this. Can you explain just what those were, and did any of them actually pass?
Yeah, there were I think it was 27 amendments brought up by Republicans. Anything from one of the ones that I thought was fascinating, and I guess a couple of Democrats went along with the amendment, but ultimately it failed, was an amendment that said, okay, members of our military, our veterans, they've gone through extensive firearm training. They understand gun safety, right? These guys have done this. Men and women have done this. They've already proven themselves. And so why should they be forced to then go get a permit and take yet another gun safety class? That one went back and forth, and you had several Republican members of the House who are military veterans, and then also some former law enforcement who stood up and said, wait a minute, it doesn't make any sense to force these folks to have to jump through these hoops again when they've already done this and proven themselves and served their country. Many of them, combat veterans. It still was ultimately rejected. And the argument from Democrats who pushed back was to say, well, we shouldn't make it easier for military veterans to purchase a firearm without doing the permit and the safety class because we have a high rate of veteran suicide. So their argument was, having that delayed period of time might give someone pause, to not want to purchase that gun to take their own lives. That went back and forth, as you can imagine, very emotional debate, very heated debate. No argument that we have too many veterans who take their lives, across this country every single day. You hear the stories, but the argument back from Republicans said, wait a minute, what we need is more support for our veterans, right? They need a community. They need, to be able to get in and get some mental health counseling. They don't need to prove themselves again capable of handling a firearm. So that argument, I should have said 27 amendments, I think it was. Only one ended up being ultimately adopted. And it was, like you say, it was after 2 a.m. Saturday morning. Everyone was exhausted. I mean, the debate, watching that debate, if folks want to go back and watch it on TVW, it was linked in my story, the debate. That was crazy. They were losing their voices because they'd been up so many hours, offering these amendments and passionate debate. Everybody was like, kind of falling asleep, if you will, while others were debating. And so they recessed and then came back Saturday afternoon and ultimately passed this thing off the House floor, and that moves to the Senate.
Now, did the lawmakers lay out their intent with this bill? You spoke on the intersection with suicide, and as we know, firearms are the leading cause of death among many age groups across the country. But was the intent with this bill to lower violent gun crime in terms of what's perpetrated against another person, or was this intended to mitigate suicide? Yeah,
well, I guess both, right? You've got firearms related, obviously. Primary, way that someone takes their life is with a firearm. But the sponsor, Representative Liz Berry, she was the one who she just kept saying it's common sense. I think she said the leading cause of death for children and teens in the U.S. is gun violence. Not necessarily an inaccurate statement to make, but their contention that forcing folks to go and get a permit and take a gun safety class before they would purchase a firearm is going to reduce gun violence. The argument on the other side is that, you don't have law-abiding citizens out there committing crimes with guns. And it's law-abiding citizens who are going to be forced to have to go out and get a permit and take a gun safety class and, jump through these other hoops. And that was the other thing too, Tim, is this is going to put a burden on State Patrol. I think it's got like a $13.7 million fiscal note attached for them just to, have to process all of these permits. It's supposed to be 30 days. I think it's 60 days if you don't have a Washington state issued form of identification. But otherwise 30 days, that's going to take some extra, State Patrol personnel to be processing all of these permits, and that's the fiscal note for that. But they haven't said what they're going to charge folks for the permit. Is that going to be $25? Is that going to be $100? Republicans say, whatever it is, it's an additional cost. And they argue the background check's already done. For folks who, maybe haven't purchased a firearm, well, when you do go into the gun shop, there's already that 10-day waiting period. They're going to run the background on you. It's going to go to the database, the nationwide database, and they're going to see if there's anything in your background that should prohibit you from owning a firearm. So that's already done. So we're going to have the permit. We're going to have the safety course. You're still going to have the background check at the gun dealer. So you've got the minimum, 30 days at least for State Patrol to issue that permit. You're going to have to take the gun safety course. could be a wait for that, right? That's going to have to go through one of the state approved safety courses. And then you're going to have to wait the 10 days, unless they're going to do away with that at the gun dealer to do the additional background check. So you're looking at like a month and a half from the time somebody, I don't want to, pardon the pun, pulls the trigger, decides to want to buy a firearm, to be able to actually, receive that gun, take ownership of that firearm. So this one's going to be interesting. It's going to go over to the House, it's going to go over to the Senate now after clearing out of the House.
I mean, it took quite a bit to push it out of the House, despite not having any Republican support. I'm imagining that something similar will happen in the Senate. How likely is it that we see, or how soon should we see challenges on this? I mean, given it's tied to the Second Amendment and the Washington State Constitution as well, it seems like this will be highly contested in court.
You are 100% right. I spoke last month with U.S. Law Shield, and the executive director told me, he said, the permit to purchase in Washington, and he was watching, there's like 5 different, gun safety bills that are moving their way through or have already cleared. We've had on the Senate side, we've had the, unlawful to carry in any place where children are likely to be present or could be present. So that one's already gone on the Senate side. But he said the permit to purchase in Washington, which a few other states have, Oregon, Massachusetts, I think New York, Illinois, have something similar. But he said the Washington permit to purchase, was the most, would have the farthest reaching consequences as far as he was concerned. And he said, no doubt. NRA has already come out and said they're going to be watching it. You've got, the Second Amendment Foundation, Bellevue-based Second Amendment Foundation. They're all over this. I have no doubt that this will lead to court challenges. And based on the way our Washington State Constitution is written and the U.S. Constitution about the right to keep and bear arms and anything getting in the way of that, it seems certainly that the challenge is coming, and highly likely that there's a pretty good argument for this, being unconstitutional, assuming it does clear the Senate and then it is signed into law by Governor Ferguson.
You're listening to Washington in Focus, a production of The Center Square. Again, go check out all these stories and more at thecentersquare.com. I'm your host, Cole McNeely. We're going to keep moving along with Washington in Focus today. Beyond the House bill that was passed requiring permits for gun purchases, Washington drivers may be funding transit when they fill up their vehicles at the gas pump due not only to how carbon auctions under the Climate Commitment Act could be indirectly raising gas prices, but how CCA money has been appropriated. With more on this, we go to Carlene Johnson, who's with the Center Square's investigative reporter, TJ Martinell.
I'm Olympia correspondent Carlene Johnson with the Center Square, and joining me is my colleague, investigative reporter for the Center Square, TJ Martinell. TJ, you did kind of a deep dive on where the heck all those Climate Commitment Act dollars are going and how those of us paying for higher prices at the pump might actually be funding it twice, it seems like, from reading your article. Elaborate.
So what was interesting about this is there's the direct impacts of the law on people who are in industries that emit carbon and have to go participate in the carbon auction. What also is happening, though, is that in response, many people have argued it's raising gas prices because they're passing the costs on to consumers. And so I was kind of interested in that when I was looking at how the money was actually being spent. I did a story prior where I looked at, the type of projects and how many of them were reducing carbon emissions, and roughly around 90% of them don't have any impact on carbon emissions. So then I was thinking, what is it actually funding? And so I started breaking things down. And what I found out, I was looking at the top 10 most expensive projects, and I was shocked to discover that more than half of them were transit projects. A significant chunk of the top 10 most expensive projects were concerning transit. And in fact, the most expensive CCA project and this is for the fiscal year 2024, the most expensive was a $66 million project in Seattle for supporting bus services. So then I started breaking down because there's different accounts. There's 3 main accounts for the CCA revenue that it's deposited into after the quarterly carbon auctions. And then there's 4 different sub accounts that are in 2 of those main accounts. One of those sub accounts is for transit related projects. So when you go download all the Excel spreadsheet that Ecology has on the website showing all this stuff, you can specifically isolate just the money projects that were that involved money from that account, the transit account. And I found that it was, I think, 45% of all spending came from that account. So if we're talking, we're pretty much half of the CCA money is being spent on transit. Now, how that relates to the gas price increase is this. Our state gas tax is constitutionally protected. When it's deposited into the motor vehicles account, under an amendment to the Constitution, Amendment 18, that money cannot be spent on anything except state highway projects. As gas tax revenue has been, stagnating and is expected to decline, they've been looking at a road usage charge. And one of the debates over that is whether or not the revenue should be more flexible, right? And people are arguing, well, we want it to be like the gas tax where the money is spent only on highway projects and maintenance, preservation, all that stuff. Well, in a way, if the CCA is impacting gas prices, Washington drivers and anybody who pays at the gas pump in the state, they are in fact paying an indirect gas tax that is funding transit.
Yes, and right after it took effect, didn't gas prices shot up anywhere? I mean, the debate is ongoing, right? But by many measures, it went up as much as 50 cents, like immediately, and kind of stayed there a long time.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's been the argument of different organizations like the Washington Policy Center and others that are affected by this. And as of right now, who knows when it can change, but I have not received any criticism or complaints or critiques of the article's conclusions or the argument that drivers may be paying an indirect gas tax to fund transit. So I think I crunched the numbers correctly, but I did a lot of double checking, because I wasn't expecting it to be so I don't want to say lopsided, but where, it's not spread out over different projects. And I'm still doing investigative work into other types of projects that are being funded, but we kind of know now what the CCA is primarily funding is its transit. And most of the projects, overwhelmingly, the amount of money that they're spending on these projects is not directed towards carbon emissions.
So, but I would venture a guess that CCA supporters would make the argument that, well, that's good. We're spending like half of the CCA profits on transit to get people out of their cars. I mean, that's the big push, right? Like, we don't want all those, combustion engines out there polluting the environment. So they're going to say, oh, well, that's a good thing. We're spending $66 million. And you said on that Seattle transit project. Do you know anything more about that one specifically, by the way?
No. And some of the projects are actually kind of vague. They don't really go into much detail. So, so they can make that argument. Somebody would probably, another person could retort, the CCA is intended to reduce carbon emissions so that we can meet statewide emission reduction goals, and it's not doing that. And also, if you want to have something specifically for funding transit, that should be a transportation style funding mechanism, not an environmental. Transit should be funded as a transportation thing, not an environmental component, for various reasons. So that's the side argument, but it's interesting how one could argue that it's allowed the state to bypass the 18th Amendment to the Constitution, protecting the gas tax revenue by having an indirect gas tax and then allowing them to use it on things like transit. And also a certain amount of revenue is dedicated to the carbon emission reduction account, but there's, unlike other types of priorities that's including environmental justice, there's no minimum amount of money that needs to be spent on carbon reduction. So there's no legal mandate to say, hey, during a fiscal year, 20% of all revenue spent money spent from these accounts has to be towards carbon reduction.
And we don't really know the overall emission reduction numbers, right? I mean, you've got that Washington Policy Center sued, I think it was a month or so ago, right? Sued the Department of Ecology saying, you and former Governor Inslee, you're required to, list these at least annually. And they went, 3-4 years without giving you any numbers. So it's like Inslee's whole agenda to protect the climate, but we didn't have any actual numbers to prove that it's all working.
Well, and that's the problem, because the CCA, the project spending, one of the things that they do is ecology reports if it had an impact on carbon emissions. And then if so, it says how many metric tons were reduced. I crunched the numbers, and in the fiscal year 2024, they reduced statewide carbon emissions by 0.3%. The problem is I have to use a figure that's from several years ago because that's the latest that I have. So, who knows what's happened since. And actually the Washington Policy Center put out a report, I believe in February, talking about how carbon emissions in the state have been increasing rather than decreasing. And they've set all these goals to reduce it. And I think, the Policy Center said that they'd have to have numerous COVID era lockdowns.
I recall that article. Yeah.
Right. In order to meet these goals. And obviously,
in other words, no drivers on the road.
Yeah. You literally have to have people not driving on the road at all and have that for a long time. At the same time, that's going to be a problem for economic growth, which they're going to, and revenue, which they're going to need for their budget shortfall. So yeah, I'm still looking into stuff, but that's pretty much the gist of it, is that people, when they go to fill up their car or whatever that uses gasoline at the gas station, the price, a portion of that price is the result of them funding transit. That's not the official thing. That's not the official thing you're going to see on paper, but that is the de facto outcome, is they're paying at the pump to fund transit.
And then let me ask you, there was another auction this week or in the last few days. So we've got new numbers, which could translate into even higher prices at the pump. I dare even ask, but you're the numbers guys, so give it to us.
Well, I think it was, they're thinking it's going to increase. So I don't want to say increase, but it's going to add 40 cents to the price per gallon. For people who aren't aware, our state gas tax, I believe, is 49 cents. And then on top of that, you have the federal gas tax. So you're paying well over $1 out of every gallon.
Mm-hmm.
Like, let's say it's $4 a gallon. Well, without those taxes, it would be $3. And that's just those things alone. There could be other factors involved, other state regulations, other federal regulations that are adding to the price. And so, there's other types of environmental policies related to fuel that could also cause the price to go up even further. But that's a separate issue from the CCA.
Wow. And you think about that, $1 a difference for every gallon. If you've got, a 12-gallon tank that you're filling up a couple of times a week, you're talking about a difference of, $12 every time.
What it also does is it reduces the impact of buying a higher fuel efficiency car, because you may be getting more mileage per gallon, but you're paying more per gallon now.
A big thanks to TJ and Carlene for covering that story. And that's all for this week's edition of Washington in Focus. We want to thank all of the Center Square reporters for joining us this week, and we want to thank you for joining us. Be sure to go to thecentersquare.com to keep up with these stories and more. Never miss what's going on from Spokane to Seattle to Olympia and the state of Washington. I'm Cole McNeely, and until next time, this has been Washington in Focus.